What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Bryan and myself will be talking around rep ranges and are they all the same for the ultimate goal of hypertrophy? But before we jump into today's topic, as always, we have some updates. Bryan, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, buddy. Glad to be here. Still hanging out at this 6 a.m. time slot here, even though you're back in the US. So, same for me, a little bit different for you. Cool to have you back here for the next 2 months. And I'm excited about our topic today. So, yeah, rep ranges and stuff like that. But quickly, some updates. So, I'm in week 2 of actually I'm exactly week 2 out from my PRP in my knee. And I think last week I spent a bunch of the episode talking about how I was worried that I screwed up everything from going on that hike on day 4 or 5 or whatever it was. And that was certainly weighing on me pretty heavily. I had some super instability and pain in the knee for a few days after that hike. So definitely not a good idea. If you get PRP in your knee, I do not recommend going for like a 3 hour hike on day 4. But on the positive side, my knee has continually improved since I went on that tirade last week on the episode. And it actually is feeling like significantly better to the point that yesterday I was able to do my very first quad session. I mean, I wouldn't even call it like a true quad session, but I was able to do more than I expected. Because the timeline they gave me was basically like the first week, don't do anything. Like let your knee just chill. Let the platelets attach to the various issues that are present in the knee so it can kind of begin the repair process type thing. And then after that first week where these things have solidified, at that point it's kind of a pain tolerance piece. So it was like as long as you're doing something and in the moment of doing it your pain is less than a 3 out of 10, then you're fine. And that was pretty cool to hear because yesterday when I began training, the first thing that I did was just kind of like some super light single leg knee extensions. And I was surprised that I was able to get up to the same weight I was using before my knee, before the PRP on the knee extension. So it was 70 pounds per leg for like a single leg extension. And there was zero pain. Like I can honestly say that like my knee felt, I wouldn't even say unstable, but it just felt like it needed to kind of warm up a little bit, which is I think probably typical of being 40 anyways. So I did a couple like really light sets of the leg extension, like first starting just straightening my knee with no weight and then straightening it with like 35 or 45 pounds. And then ultimately by set 3 or 4, I was up to 70 pounds and no pain in the joint at all. And then I was able to go over to the hack press machine and just like I was expecting, my range of motion was limited. I can't get full knee flexion yet, but I'm able to get down to about parallel with no pain or unnecessary tugging on the knee. So I was able to get through a couple sets of the hack press. On that one, I was not able to use the same weight, and I didn't expect to. The doctor told me that the knee extension would be the first thing that I could introduce, and then over the course of the weeks, it would be introducing um, knee flexion in the form of squatting and stuff like that. So I was able to use 300 pounds on the hack press, which may sound like a lot, but I usually use like 550. So 300 is not actually that much, and it felt really good. I felt like I stayed in my quads, stayed off my joints, and it was as hard as I would want it to be for the day. And so I got a quad session in sort of, and my quads are actually like a little bit sore today, which is kind of cool because I thought it was going to be more like 4 weeks until I could get that sensation back into them a little. But after 2 weeks, I was able to do that, and I feel great today. No knee soreness, no lingering kind of like, oh shit, what did I do yesterday type feelings. And so super positive there. And I think that from here forward, it's probably going to just be a nice even progression up until maybe I get to week 6, which would be 4 weeks from now, and then hopefully things are back to normal and I'm somewhat superhuman. So that's the update on the knee. I got a couple other things to discuss, but what is going on in your world? You are back in the US. You look a little different over there. You got the light of God coming in behind you.
Yeah, it's now 8 a.m. recording the podcast instead of 8 p.m. when we would normally be doing it. For me, at least when I was on Central Indonesia time. I would say that the biggest kind of updates for me, I have a couple funny ones actually. My circadian rhythm. So with the really big travel, right? I'm one of the people where I will like sacrifice for like a day or two so that I don't have like weird jet lag and circadian stuff going on for like days down the road. So basically, what I did is like I just pretty much didn't sleep on any of the plane rides, and then we landed here, back in the States at 9 a.m. In that first day, I was like a straight up zombie. Like I had never been that tired in my entire life. There was a few points in the day where I was just like nodding off and then like sitting in a chair. It's this sort of thing. And like I was just like, okay, the sun's going down. I can like it's socially acceptable for me to go to sleep now. Um, Slept a bunch that first night, and then I've been mostly good. Still going to bed quite early, but I have been getting up at like 4 a.m. and I'm like up, ready to go. So I've been just getting up and starting my day, but that will kind of work itself back out over the coming days, which I'm excited um, for that.
So you aren't a huge coffee guy, or I mean you love coffee, but you kind
I
of
do.
strayed away from the caffeine black coffee thing for a little while, and then I believe I saw a story from Jenny that you had like 4 of them on the flight or something like that.
Yeah, because it's one of those things like I need to stay up. It's when you're traveling those big ranges like that, like the concept of time and day, it just gets all mushed together. Like we had 3 flights, one to Jakarta, which is the capital in Indonesia, so that we could pick up like the flight we wanted. Then we flew to Dubai and we landed there at like midnight, and then we like worked for a bit. I had a coffee there, and then we had like 3 or 4 hours there, and then we had our big like 15-hour flight to Washington D.C. And I think I had like 2 coffees on that one. Um, yeah, it's such a strange thing because you're like in the same clothes, but especially when you're going from like Asia back to the U.S., you gain in 12 hours. So it's like we left Thursday morning, and then we got back to the States like Friday morning, but it was like 40 hours of travel. So
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
super trippy. And yeah, but yeah, Friday was pretty rough, and I was just like all over the
That
place.
it's got to be weird going the other way too, because you probably lose an entire day when you go to Asia.
Yeah.
Like you're like, where did Thursday go? It's just gone.
Yeah. Yeah, when we went there the first time we left, we were actually in Mexico. We left Mexico Sunday morning, and we got to Bali at like mid or like 1 a.m. Wednesday morning
Wow. Yeah,
there.
you had
So
lost 2 days basically. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's really wild how that works out. But kind of my one funny update I have is when you take the big international flights like that, you generally get like 2 meals per flight. So we had like 2 meals on our Dubai flight and then 2 meals on the Dubai to US flight. And what they will generally do is some of the meal options will be like related to the departing country, the arriving country, as you have like some different options for cuisines and stuff. And when we left Indonesia, we had an option of like mee goreng, which is like shrimp and like a fried rice and some vegetables, like a pretty traditional type meal. And then with Dubai, we had like a chicken and potato kind of curry thing with some onions sort of thing, a pretty again, decent quality meal. And then we had another similar one as we left Dubai. And then as we're approaching the US and they're coming down with the meal cart and they're like, oh, are you hungry? And I'm like, yeah, what are the options? And she goes, slice of pizza or ham and cheese sandwich. I was like, yeah, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Like, we are definitely going to the US. Like, those are the 2 meal options. And I was just like, I don't want either.
Right.
So
Right.
I
No,
just
you
didn't
wouldn't.
eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But it,
I'm
it
sure you
was
brought
so
your
funny
own some of
because
your own food, right?
I had a banana.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
Okay.
but it was like so wild that like I was like, this is literally par for the course of like the environment of
Yeah.
food here in the
Yeah.
States.
I was thinking that maybe it was going to be like, because it's an international flight and they're like, you take Emirates or one of those nice airlines or whatever, that it would be like, here's your filet mignon with like mashed potatoes or something along those lines. But ham and cheese, I mean, that's really just kind of mailing it in. Really
Yeah,
funny.
the other ones were like good though. I was pleasantly surprised, except for that one was like a oh wow, that sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What else we
Um,
got from you?
Yeah, so I one thing that's interesting is, since this PRP thing, um like, I can bike in the sense that I can turn the pedal with my foot, but I can't really like press down and go up a hill. So I can't really bike like in nature super well, especially around Boulder where there's a bunch of like hills and mountains and stuff like that. So I haven't biked in 2 weeks, which means that I haven't really gotten out of breath in 2 weeks, because I also can't run, obviously, or I wouldn't run. Um, so I haven't done cardio after that being a huge staple of my updates for the last like 6 to 8 weeks. I started biking, I started doing the nasal breathing thing and all this. I haven't done any of that in 2 weeks. I've just sort of been walking a little bit, and my steps have plummeted. So I'm down to like 5 to 7,000 steps most days, just kind of not trying to overdo things with my knee. Um, and and so I was expecting that my VO2 max was going to start kind of descending down again, which I was bummed about, because it took me a lot of that work with all this nasal breathing and stuff to get it up from where it was hanging out around like 40.0. And then it kind of has gotten up into like the 42.5 range. So it's been a lot of work to get up even 2.5 points. And I know that's not even fully accurate. It's whatever my watch is telling me, but it's me against me. And so I took my watch, calculated my VO2 for the first time in 2 weeks yesterday as I was going out for a walk, and it was up half a point. And so I was super happy about that, that it doesn't seem like not doing this cardio seems to have a negative impact. Although part of me was thinking maybe there's like a delayed effect, and like the cardiovascular adaptations take a little while to cement in. So I'm not sure on that aspect. Maybe a listener knows. But I think on the positive side, it's possible that maybe it's just that I'm continuing to focus on the nasal breathing thing, like while I sleep and like throughout the day, and I'm still doing my walks while nasal breathing and stuff like that. And so maybe that is having like this improved impact on my VO2 max, even though I'm not actually doing higher intensity training and getting out of breath and stuff like that. So just something interesting that I'll keep an eye on. But I was really happy to see the VO2 up into the 43s now, especially because now that I turned 40, the range of VO2 max for me has dropped. So it was like the normal range was 40 to 47 or 41 to 47 when I was 39 years old. But now that I'm 40, the range is 38 to 43 or something like that. So this extra couple months of life has given me a different VO2 max range, and now I'm like securely in the average to above average VO2 max, which is unique for me, as I remember a story from when I used to attend the OPEX training back in, I think it was 2012, 2013. And they had one of those like handheld VO2 things, and they took my VO2 max, and James Fitzgerald looked at me and he goes, "No wonder you hate Metcons. Your VO2 max is awful." And so it's just kind of funny that now it's like my VO2 max hasn't changed in 10 years. I've just gotten older. So therefore it like appears better on the spectrum. All right, let's see. I have two more really quick updates here. So this past week, Kim was gone. Longest trip she's ever taken from me, and left me with the kids. So I had 5 days by myself, Wednesday to Sunday. I did awesome. I crushed it. Super dad over here. And I got to work out twice. I only had one really bad day of TV. And it really wasn't too bad. And then on the flip side of that, my second update is I get to now leave myself. So this Friday, I have a dude's trip with the husbands that Kim went with the wives on her trip on. So me and the dudes are going to San Diego this Friday. We're going to go to PB. We're going to hang out. We're going to drink some beers, probably some liquor too. maybe some wine, maybe all the different types of alcohol. We're going to go out to the club. No, not really the club. We're just going to go kind of bar hopping a little bit in PB, hang out at the beach, watch some football, just do normal like guy stuff, but without having kids and family kind of hanging over the top. So I'm really excited for that, but not sure that I'm going to be able to work out. I think I'll get one workout in Friday to Monday, but it's definitely going to be a challenge for me to get any fitness in this weekend. So I'm just trying to focus this week on getting as many sessions as I can in, and then using the weekend over there in San Diego to kind of relax a bit. And I'll be back here Monday night just in time to wake up Tuesday morning for Eat, Train, Prosper. So I'll give you guys a full update on how many beers I consumed and all that good stuff once I get through that weekend.
So I forgot this when typing up my updates, but I am now 2 nights in of the mouth taping, that the
Oh,
recommendation I
nice.
took from you. And if I remember correctly, you said the first few nights you had horrible sleep, correct?
Yes.
And what was it, horrible sleep and waking up super, super early, or just horrible sleep in general?
Just horrible sleep. I slept the normal, like I would still wake up at, 5:30 or 6 normal time, but I just found myself waking up multiple times throughout the night. I think because my normal process of getting air was compromised. So like changing positions, just different things kind of would spark me to wake up. Yeah.
Understood, understood. Yeah, so mine hasn't changed really at all, and apparently I maybe just didn't breathe through my mouth when sleeping in the first place.
Awesome.
Um, I do want to, one of my goals while I'm here is to pay a little bit closer attention to my sleep. So one thing that I don't know if I've really talked about on the podcast before. I am like not a dreamer, or in the event that I do dream, I never remember them. Maybe one or two per year, and it's
Mhm.
only if like something happens that next morning that happened in the dream, and everything comes like rushing back to me. Now, in kind of analyzing my sleep, so I have like a Garmin Venue 2, kind of like what you say, take it at face value, comparing, day to day. I have very little REM and deep sleep. So I'll have like an 8 hour night of sleep. I might have like this past night, there was like 21 minutes of REM sleep, and then like 45 minutes of deep sleep. And then it's literally like 7 hours and 4 minutes of light sleep. Um, I did some digging, and it's apparently supposed to be, I can't remember which, but REM in deep sleep should be about like 15. One is 15%, the other is like 20%, and then obviously the rest. So I am considerably under those targets. So that is something that I will kind of continue to monitor and see if I can do, and bringing that REM sleep up and seeing if that will actually have me remembering more dreaming or doing more dreaming. But that is like a kind of a personal project for the next
Mm.
couple months.
Yeah, I'm super intrigued by this too because my version of Apple Watch is 2 years old, and I just saw a commercial like literally last night during football. There was a commercial for like the new Apple Watch, and it talked specifically about how it calculates your REM sleep for you, and my
Mm,
watch does not do that. So all it does is tell me the total time that I was asleep versus the total time I was in bed, and then it has little dash marks to tell me when I woke up. So like I can look at it and be like, oh, I guess I woke up 4 times, but I thought I only woke up once type thing, which I think is also interesting data. Um, but uh, but I'm very curious about REM sleep because I do remember dreams and I do have dreams, but I always thought it was the opposite in that if you were in like super deep REM sleep, you wouldn't remember them, and it's only the ones right before you wake up that you actually remember. So your sleep is lighter at that point. That's the way I always perceived it, but I could be wrong on that.
yeah, I don't have a clue, to be completely honest.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Um, but I think that is pretty much it for my updates for today.
Cool. I have one last one that I'll touch
Yep.
on. I guess actually two. So one of the things that I love about the United States is no one does grocery stores like the US, right? Like, I mean, just
Yeah.
everything under the fucking sun is at the grocery store. So we get back, I'm super pumped to go. We go. There's like a whole bunch of shelves empty. There was like no sparkling water like whatsoever, and that's one thing I was like pumped to just like get like cans of like a shitty flavored sparkling water, like a lime or something like that, because they're just,
Yeah.
it's just easier to drink for me like throughout the day, and I haven't had one in months. There weren't any. There were 0 egg whites in the entire grocery store, and there's usually like 4 or 5 brands, and I even thought, and I was like, "Man, I'm gonna go ask this guy because like, maybe they're just," and he's like, he was scanned it, he's like, "No, they're out at the supplier," and I was like, "What the fuck is happening?"
Hmm.
And then we go to get gas after, and there was no gas at the gas station.
Wow.
I was like, "What the fuck is going on?" It was so just strange, and I was like, "This isn't the United States that I remember."
I wonder if that's a product of you being in Roanoke or whatever, because like I haven't felt any of that in Boulder.
Yeah, it could be like we are in like a smaller area, but I mean, even of all the like, I don't know, 9 times that I've been here before in the months we've spent, that's like never happened.
Yeah.
But that's probably why, like a smaller rural area, and not, you just get deprioritized, I would imagine, when push comes to shove on who's getting stock and who's not.
Yeah. And also prices have gone super high up. Like they keep posting things like chicken breast now up another like 72% or something like
Hmm.
that, you know? And so like I notice it when I go to the store. I don't really tend to look at prices too often, but when I do, I'm just like, whoa, things didn't used to be that expensive. So I mean that is super representative of there just being a supply demand issue.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then the last thing, so I'm back at the smaller gym, which is very we're kind of reminiscent of a high school weight room sort of thing, which brings back some nostalgia, but then also some just frustrations of like, I just
Sure.
want a functional trainer, you know. um, but I was like, okay, I need a squat pattern movement on this day. I'm gonna put back in like a traditional barbell, back squat. It's been over 2 years. My legs have gotten a lot stronger. I have significant better, leg development than I used to. I'm gonna put it back in. So yesterday was like, week one where I'm testing everything, and it felt absolutely horrible. And I was like, there's no fucking way I'm going to do this.
I
and
saw
I,
the video. It didn't look that bad. I mean, I saw your comment was like more hip flexion than knee flexion or whatever. It really looked pretty even to me. It didn't look terrible.
it's like the moment arm. And that's kind of like what now that I've just know more, like, than I used to around like squat mechanics and different things like that. It's just like how for me to balance based on like my femur length or whatever, like the bar is basically almost stacked right over the knee joint. And then I just have that big moment arm at the hip. And that's why I'd always been a hip dominant squatter. Like at that position, kind of don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
And it just did not feel good. And same thing, like always, I was like my lower back, I could feel the fatigue, and my like quads didn't even have that kind of like subjective, pump like I would out of a hack squat or
Mm,
something. And I was like, this is, I was like, I'm glad I closed the loop, because there was always this
mhm.
thing in the back of my head, like, oh, I know more now. Maybe I can perform it better. But it was pretty much like more the same. It felt like a super hard effort, and I didn't get that stimulus that I wanted. My knees kind of were already feeling it a little bit, and I was like, there's no way. Like, I'm not. There's
Yeah.
no way I'm doing this.
And you didn't try like a heel wedge setup or anything like that.
I mean, I had my Oli shoes on, but it was I didn't. And then also the how the squat rack is the safety bars are like kind of high, so I had to use like a really a more narrow grip than I would prefer. Um, and I was like, I'm just going to use the Smith machine, like the heel elevated Smith machine squat, and
Mhm.
it is what it is. But at least I know. But that was kind of funny, where I was like excited about it, and then I was like,
Yeah.
this no way in hell,
Yeah.
no way in hell.
We talked about this like over a year ago when I did my last strength cycle and I threw like back squats and deadlifts back in and stuff like that. Kind of wild that that was actually like last September, October. So we're literally a year
Oh,
from
yeah,
when I did that, which doesn't
crazy.
feel like a year ago.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember you saying at that time, like, yeah, I'm sure one day I'll like do another back squat cycle and like see if I can still be as strong as I was and like all that stuff. And now it's just like a year later, you're like, nah, that shit ain't happening.
No, it's not worth it. The deadlift, I could. I have always enjoyed deadlifting, and my
Yeah.
proportions are just better set up for that. But
Yeah.
yeah, no fucking way.
Yeah.
Cool. You ready to jump into today's episode?
Yeah, yeah. So before we talk about rep ranges, which I know we're super excited about, that we did have a question from a longtime listener hit me up on DM, and he was asking about fly movements versus press movements. And so his question was basically, It's kind of long, but I'll just read it real quick. What do you think the hypertrophic potential is of a pec fly versus a press? Any opinion on what ratio of fly to press volume would make the most sense in a hypertrophy program? I feel like flies give a better stretch and cause less systemic fatigue and potential shoulder joint stress. So you might be able to do more effective volume on the flies. And then he wrote like a day later and said, now that I rethink it, could a deeper stretch cause more muscle damage and more soreness? So maybe I didn't think that one through. But hey, curious what you guys think. Um, so yeah, I have a few different thoughts, but how about you? You want to jump in with anything?
Yeah, I mean, I can also just kind of play, backseat to and add my thoughts
Sure,
after you break it down in parts for sure.
sure. Yeah, so I think there's a few different ways you can look at this. Like the first reaction is or maybe I should say not my first reaction now, but maybe what I think people think my reaction should be would be more based off of like the N1 philosophy of, you want to use your rib cage to press around and leverage your rib cage so that you wouldn't want to do a movement that's super abducted away from the body because then you're not leveraging your rib cage. And you keep so anyways that would be what I think people would expect me to say, and I think that a year ago going through the N1 stuff that probably would be what I would say. um, I went and did a quick search on research PubMed to see if there have been studies that have looked at this, and there have been three that I found. Two of them compared the PEC deck machine to some sort of press. I'm not exactly sure if it was a bench press or dumbbell press or whatever it was. And then one actually compared a dumbbell fly to a barbell bench press. And from the quick kind of review that I did, it seemed like the pressing movement outperformed the fly movement in the majority of the cases or all of them. I like literally looked at this for 5 minutes quickly before the show, so I can't very confidently say what I saw, but I wanted to at least have something to kind of begin this discussion with. And so the that was really like the conclusion that was found was that the barbell pressing just seemed to be more effective for the pectoralis major pressing structures. There was, I believe, a study that found that the dumbbell fly had a little bit more EMG activity on the front delt, which also doesn't surprise me, as a common sentiment is that as you stretch back and down, that the stretch actually occurs more on the delt than it does on the chest, and we tend to know that whatever muscle is being stretched at the bottom of the rep is probably the muscle that's receiving the majority of the stimulus. So none of that really surprises me. I know that at least one of these studies was EMG based. And if you're I think it was probably the dumbbell fly study, because if you're comparing a dumbbell fly to a bench press, the EMG activity is going to be at the contracted position primarily. We know that through EMG research. So, like, maybe you would see higher EMG potentially on a pec deck because you're actually having tension at the contracted position. Whereas at a dumbbell fly, you're basically doing the dumbbell fly for the stretch mediated hypertrophy potentially. And so, you're not going to get a huge EMG reading at the stretch position, whereas a bench press is also a lengthened overload movement, but it does have more tension through the contracted portions of the rep than a fly does, where you essentially get to the top of the rep and nothing's happening. So that's kind of like the research side of it. I think practically, or maybe anecdotally, would be the better way of saying that from my experience. I love fly movements. I went through a period of time where I didn't use them when I was super inundated with the N1 stuff, and I was trying to use the rib cage for everything, and I was doing primarily press arounds and different press variations that adduct the arm across the body using the rib cage for leverage, etc. And man, I know soreness just isn't something that we want to put too much credence in. Like you don't want to be like, I had a poor session because I didn't get sore. But I also like to look at soreness as a sign of like, hey, at least you're stimulating the muscle that you want to stimulate type thing. And when I am doing straight up pressing movements, I don't get sore in my chest. Like I just don't. But it takes a very, very small dose of a fly type movement to get me sore. And not just as like a novel thing, like, hey, I haven't done flies for 6 months. Let me do one set of flies and see what happens. Like, yes, of course I would get sore there. But over the last 6+ months, I've had the dumbbell fly press in my program for a really long time. And I definitely can't take credit for creating this movement. As I'm sure many people have done it in the past. But to me, it just made sense, and I instituted it a number of years ago. And it the last 6 months have just been consistently that movement every week in my program, and every week my chest just receives an incredible stimulus from that. It's always something that I do second, so I always do my like short press style movements first. In this in my life now, it's mostly a cable press. If I had a machine press, I would do that too. Um, and then I moved to the dumbbell fly press, and it creates that stretch at the bottom that you just cannot get from like a standard pressing movement. And I feel like it also uses the rib cage more obviously than a super abducted fly would be, because the elbow is still traveling down and back. If you can see my elbow on YouTube, it's more like here than it is like out here, like this, like a fly would be. So I'm still in here. It's just going deeper and getting a more of a stretch in the chest there. So anecdotally, I'm a huge fan of including some of that in. My days usually look like, he asked about volume. So my days usually look like 3 sets of a press and then 2 sets of a fly. And that's one of my days. And then the other day, I usually just do like 3 sets of a press. So that's 8 sets of chest a week. And that seems to work pretty well for me. And that's the way I prefer to go about it. So a little mix of science and anecdote, I guess. How about you?
So I think I you have to take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Something that I have a personal, I can't say vendetta. It's just a my skeptic kind of sense goes off with some of the research on things like this. I am very skeptical of the performance quality of the people doing it. Like if we were to go gym to gym, not even if we were to pop in like random gyms across the United States and just observe people performing a fly and a, let's say, a dumbbell bench press, I would, if we were to rank, A, B, C, D, fucking F thing, I would say on average, we'd probably be at like a C to C plus. I think if you, with that understanding, if you took that and then improved people's performance of it, it would potentially change the outcomes of the research. So, as Brian and Aaron, speaking to listener of this, what I would first recommend doing is, if you are someone who has a C, performance execution on either of these movements, bring it up to an A, because you can change your stimulus that you provide by changing your performance execution. Like I was someone who used to press, I would only bring my elbows down to about 90 and the dumbbells would be 8 inches away from my chest still. The thing with like a pressing movement like that, we get that stretch mediated hypertrophy. It's a lengthened overload kind of movement. If you avoid the fully lengthened position, you don't get to tap into any of that, stretch mediated hypertrophy sort of thing. So if you're someone that's doing that, stop fucking doing that and perform the movements where you can get your elbows, down closer to your rib cage and you can get that full stretch and you get better hypertrophic stimulus out of better execution of that movement. So the first thing I would say is like just be honest with yourself, record a couple of your sets, um, and go from there. And then second, with the fly type of movement, it I know Brian, you really like that like fly press kind of hybrid thing. Personally, I hate it. It's just like it doesn't feel good. I have a right shoulder that I had surgically repaired that I just didn't rehab well when I was younger, and it just bothers it. So I personally don't like that. But like a traditional seated like pec, fly machine, I can get that similar positioning, not as much load there because my arm is straight as opposed to bent, but I can get a good like shortened stimulus then, right? And more kind of like a metabolic fatigue of the chest and really hammer that kind of shortened position where with like the dumbbell press, because of how the dumbbells are, especially once you get decently strong, you're pressing 80s, 90s, 100s. Like these are big fucking dumbbells, and you can't really reach a fully shortened position because the dumbbells are in the way. So understanding like these different parts help you with kind of your decision making and understanding a little bit there. Um, I would say of the hypertrophic, potential, probably like what Bryan said, more of the pressing movement, just because it's more length and overload. It's what we know. And one thing I think that I kind of will kind of wrap up here on, something that I think we as a space are unfortunately losing sight of a little bit, is like the basic concept of like adaptation to get stronger to something. And the loadability, the stability of something is like so much more of a pressing movement, as opposed to like a pec fly, a cable fly sort of thing. And you're just much better leverage to like produce force and move load to create an adaptation there. And those things I feel like it's important to never kind of fully lose sight of that, because we can get lost in the complexities and chasing optimality, but kind of miss the forest for the trees a little bit of like,
Hmm.
what is the goal to get stronger
Hmm.
at a movement, to produce, to put force or put tension through a muscle? What is the best way that we can do that, sort of thing?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I like what you started with talking about like improving your execution first. Because I think that that's like just a sweeping good general recommendation. And then the last thing on this that I just thought of is it's interesting how, not surprising, but hypertrophy coach Joe Bennett and Cass both started, in the same place at the MI40 gym and they have similar philosophies. Like if you look at both of their Instagrams, you see a lot of crossover between the types of movements that they suggest and like the rationale that they use for suggesting them. You can tell that they kind of come from the same background. But one thing that you see Joe Bennett do a lot is you actually see him doing a lot of that wider adduction type movement. I think one of his favorite ones that I've seen a couple times on there is he'll put wrist cuffs on and he'll have like a wide cable crossover type setup and he'll be seated in a bench and it's kind of like a sternal crossover type thing where it almost emulates the pec deck machine with the handles, not the one the old school one where your like elbows are on it. That thing is absolutely awful. But
Awful.
the yeah, it's the worst. But the new ones where you have the handles that you can bring together at the front, he kind of emulates that with the cables and the cuffs on, and and I really like that. Like I think that fits into the mentality of like something I would program and want to do as well. And I know it doesn't use the rib cage like Cass would want you to do, but I think that there are definitely varying ways of effective of inputting effective chest training into your program.
Agreed.
Yeah. And something I actually may try that at some point. That actually, now that we're talking about it, that little wrist cuffed crossover thing could be a kind of cool addition to my program at some point. So maybe I'll do that and experiment. All right. Do you want to jump into the topic?
Yeah, one last thing. I was,
Yeah.
I guess we had some internet kind of connectivity thing. One of the best cues I ever got for doing any kind of like individual pressing. This isn't obviously going to work with like a barbell bench press, but dumbbell bench or a pec fly is squeezing your elbows together at the top, right? So many people just like touch their knuckles and stuff like that, and that's not like the actual a good cue, because you can kind of like round your shoulders, cave your chest in, and then take stimulus away from there. But like if on a fly you're trying to squeeze your elbows together, like that is a very, very good mental cue for helping that kind of very shortened position of that exercise.
Yeah, yeah, like the inner elbow. So we want to be
Yeah,
thinking
the
about like
elbow
the
pit.
elbow crease. And the another way of thinking about it is bringing your bicep across your chest. So I think either of those cues work really well.
Yep. Yeah, let's jump in.
Mm. So I think we're having some internet connectivity issues here a little bit.
I'm good to start the rep ranges if you are.
Okay, okay, yeah. I just had a bunch of internet issue over here. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. Do you want to jump us off here?
Yeah. So, kind of the thought we have here is we have different rep ranges, right, that we can use for hypertrophy, and kind of the what's the word I'm looking for? The the gap. Gap's not the right term, but range, I guess I should say, is about five to 30. So 5 reps on the lower side of things, and then up to upwards of like 30 reps on the higher side of things. And we want to be, consider, are all these rep ranges equal for producing hypertrophy? Obviously, for things like strength, obviously we would be on the lower end of that, but that's outside the context of today's conversation. And it's important to provide that distinction. But all things kind of considered, why would you or should you aim for the lower end of the rep range? Why would you or should you aim for the higher end of the rep range? Could there be differences between them? What factors and influences can go into your decision making process for those, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. Yeah. No. No. Totally. Good introduction there. So I think a lot of this topic has gained traction for two reasons recently. One is that there was a meta analysis or systematic review, something like that, by Schoenfeld and Gurgic and some others, called Loading Recommendations for Muscle Strength, Hypertrophy, and Local Endurance, a re-examination of the repetition continuum. And in this review, they basically established that per the plethora of studies that are out there, it seems like set for set, you can do a set of 5 reps and you can do a set of 30 reps. And as long as you're going to failure on or close to failure on both those sets, that they are reasonably the same as far as building muscle. And then you had Paul Carter, who's been a big voice in the space. Has a bunch of followers that I think are in our network of people as well. And he's been putting out all of this information, being like, the effective reps model is all that matters. So it's the last 5 reps that really matter. If you take 85% of your 1RM and do a set of 5 or 6 reps, then you're getting effective reps from the beginning. And then his argument is there's a ton of extenuating circumstances that end up having a negative impact as your reps climb from there. And so the first thing that I really want to point out here is that I think the aspect of individual differences is extremely important and potentially very relevant. Um, and this comes on the heels of Greg Nuckols doing a review of this kind of similar idea on the Stronger by Science podcast yesterday. And he referenced a study that's randomly, they had 2 groups, and one group was performing I want to say 8 to 12 reps or 8 to 10, something like that. And the other group was performing 27 to 31 reps, which is just a weird rep range. Like, man, you doing your 31s out there? So there were extremes on either end. So as like an average, like the end result of that study was as you would expect from the Schoenfeld analysis, where it was like, hey, on average, it didn't matter if you did, 8 to 10 or 27 to 31 reps, the trend was pretty similar along the way. But when you look at the individual data points, I think his reference was there was one person that lost 5 pounds of muscle or 5% doing high reps and gained 13% doing the moderate reps, like the 8 to 12s. And then there was another person that was the complete opposite who, had no negligible effect training in the moderate rep ranges, but gained 10 or 15% in the 27 to 31 rep ranges. And so if these people just use their individual experience, kind of like Paul Carter is doing, and maybe he's that person that just responds really well to those 5 to 8 rep sets and has numerous issues that we're going to discuss along the way of potential pitfalls of doing higher reps. Maybe he just really is sensitive to those pitfalls of the higher reps. And so his bias is that it's lower reps are better. Whereas somebody else, maybe that study that Knuckles referenced, who the person got 15% more gains in the 27 to 31 rep range, their experience is totally different. And they're like, man, I hate that 8 rep range. Like, that's awful. I gain no muscle there. Like, you got to do your 27s if you really want to gain muscle type thing. So I think realizing that individual differences exist is a super important piece to take into this. And then I have a question for you, because I think a lot of this did come from Paul. And I know he obviously is getting a lot of his information from Beardsley, and you just finished Beardsley's book, or you're working on it. I'm not sure if you're done yet. What have you learned from the Beardsley book about the different rep ranges?
Yeah, so I have I think like 20% left of the book. The hardest thing about that book is it's so dense and it requires like such focus. It's almost like a textbook esque, and it's just you can't just like read like for an hour because like your brain's gonna be fucking soup
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, Pretty much in First of all, I would recommend going and just buying it and reading it. It's $3 for the Kindle version. I don't even know if they have a hard copy version. There might be, but it's literally like $3. Like the value to cost is probably the value to cost win of the century, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
Essentially, the higher rep ranges, all he's using, he calls it the effective reps model, or sorry, the stimulating reps model, but it's been also used as the effective reps model. And it's basically like the 15 to 20 rep range, or the 20 to 30 rep range. Like, all those first 20 reps are doing is getting you fatigued enough to the point where on those last 5 reps, it's approximately 5. It's not like a hard 5. You have to try really, 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 really fucking hard so that you recruit all of your large motor units that control the most muscle fibers. And those are the motor units that actually produce hypertrophy. When you are, let's say you're doing a set of 30 on the leg extension, those first 10 reps, you're not really trying that hard, because if you were trying really hard, you can't do 30 reps. You would only be doing like
Yeah.
12 reps or 9 reps or something like that. So the again, I'm pretty much, boiling this down in summary. When you Hypertrophy comes from trying really, really fucking hard. And if you're trying really hard at reps, 28, 29, and 30, reps 21 through, or sorry, reps like 1 through like 20, you're literally going through the motion, and the whole goal of reps, 1 through 21, or whatever, 22, are just to produce enough fatigue in the local musculature and signal sending from your CNS so that those final reps are really, really hard. And Chris's kind of standpoint and relative suggestions are, well, instead of spending, the 40 seconds or whatever, just getting to the point where it's really, really hard, let's just increase load so that after rep 2 or 3, you're already working like really, really hard. And if I remember correctly, which I think I do because my new program is built off of this, he kind of suggests like the 7 to 9
Mm.
approximate rep range.
Interesting. Yeah, and I know one thing I do want to talk about maybe at the end of this that I don't want to forget about is the idea of different movements having different rep ranges. And Paul has an argument that he believes it doesn't really matter what the movement is; it should all be in the 5 to 8 or 5 to 10 rep range or whatever. But something else to kind of discuss down the line. And then one other thing, kind of on the point of what you're saying, is kind of the old archaic belief around this was that if you do higher reps, you get slow twitch muscle fibers, and if you do lower reps, you get fast twitch muscle fibers. And the new research is pretty much showing that the reason that 5 to 30 rep range all works is because the fast twitch muscle fibers, which are the ones that you really want to fatigue if you want to grow, they fatigue in those last 5 reps or 6 or 7 or whatever it is. Like, they progressively fatigue more as you get closer to failure. So So it's not that they're not going to fatigue. Like, it's not like, oh, you do a set of 30, it's just slow twitch muscle fibers. It's like you're still going to get the fast twitch muscle fibers, but you have to do all this other stuff before you get there. It's like the analogy that just popped in my head is like, if you want to go sprint 100 meters, you can either, warm up and go sprint that 100 meters, or you can walk for like an hour and then sprint your 100 meters. And like, which would be more effective, like warming up and then sprinting, or like wasting an hour of energy and then trying to sprint? And so maybe that's not like a perfect analogy, but it makes sense to me. And I think that it makes sense in the general scheme of kind of this repetition spectrum as well. So I just kind of want to go through a few of the points that I made, pros and cons of the different rep ranges. And then if you want to jump in and discuss any of them along the way, just raise your hand, and that's cool too.
Let's do it.
Cool. So the first thing on higher reps is that they just literally take longer. So, I mean, it sounds really simple, but if you're going to do a set of 25 reps instead of a set of 6 reps, you're literally going to be working out for like an extra minute and 10 seconds per set than you would be otherwise. There's going to be a higher amount of metabolic stress and metabolic accumulation. And science is still sort of a little bit ambiguous, or undetermined maybe, when it comes to the contribution of metabolic stress in the development of hypertrophy. So, we have some blood flow restriction studies that show that it seems to be somewhat effective, but that's under like certain conditions, and like, who knows, like, compared to not doing that, like, is that actually even better, or is it just kind of effective as a substitute? But metabolic stress is going to accrue fatigue. There's like these different types of fatigue that you can accrue, right? There's our central nervous system. There's the peripheral fatigue, which is like the fatigue to the actual specific local muscle itself. And then there's like these other energy concerns like metabolic stress and metabolic accumulation. And so these are a fatigue that you need to recover from. And so if metabolic stress doesn't, like, we'll just theorize and say, hey, metabolic stress does not contribute to hypertrophy. On that ground, then why would you want to do higher reps and accumulate a stress that isn't contributing to hypertrophy? It's just something else you have to recover from now. So there's that potential idea. Then there's the idea of the central nervous system fatigue. And I think that this has kind of swung a little bit in the last couple of years. Like, it used to just be common knowledge, I feel like 5 or 10 years ago, that doing low reps with heavy weight is going to crush your central nervous system. Is that something that you've heard as well?
I mean, yeah. And the thing that, to play devil's advocate here, is I'm curious if it's really the CNS fatigue perspective or if it's the axial loading
Mm,
perspective.
mm. No, and I think that's a huge, huge, huge point as well. Like, that's kind of how I would see it as well.
Yeah.
Because I'm not like a scientist. I don't know like the intricacies of central nervous system fatigue super well, but I do know what I feel in the moment. And so we're going to take sets of 1 to 4 reps out of here, because those are strength rep ranges. So I think there's a cost of doing those that we've discussed on here before, that is a combination of psychological arousal and anxiety and like other kind of mental pieces, I think, that contribute to fatigue in those rep ranges. So we can leave that out. But a lot of those same psychological anxiety fatigue costs aren't something that I notice in the like 6 to 10 range. It's very prominent in that like 1 to 4 range, but maybe not as much for me in the like 6 to 10. Like, I wouldn't have to amp myself up to do a set of 6 to 10 on like a hack or a pendulum the same way that I would if I was going to get under a hack or a pendulum even and do 2 reps. Like, I'm going to do the heaviest 2 reps on the pendulum that I can. Well, that's still a different level of psychological arousal than it is to do like 8 to 10, 6 to 10, whatever it is. The axial loading piece is huge too, because regardless of whether I'm doing a back squat for 2 reps or for 6 to 10, I feel like there is a more taxing toll fatigue cost to do that movement than there would be to do the pendulum or the hack in that same rep range. So axial loading, I think that that's actually in the science has been contributed to central nervous system fatigue. Like that is literally like the definition of it. Your central nervous system runs through your spinal cord. So if you're loading you're axially on your back, then yes, you're going to be causing fatigue there. But I think that in the newer age of science, it seems that there's a lot of central nervous system fatigue costs that comes with doing these higher reps more so than doing the moderate rep ranges. And some of that could be just total time under load. Like I was saying, you just do longer sets. You're doing a set of 25, your body is literally under load and you're having to resist that for longer periods of time. There's more metabolic stress, which again, we don't know could contribute to CNS fatigue without like a hypertrophic stimulus as a result of it, or at least probably not an increasing level of hypertrophic stimulus for the amount of fatigue that you're getting from those. So anyway, those would be like initial thoughts for me, and then I have a couple other points. Any thoughts on any of that stuff though?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess one thing that I will do here is kind of take like a devil's advocate kind of approach to some of this. Um, to put my cards on the table. I am not someone who there are very few things I'm going to do for like a fucking 30 reps or something like that. It might be like one burnout set of like, okay, I'm going to do one set of like max push-ups at the end of my like, push session or something like that. But that's pretty much it. Like I'm chalking it up, going home sort of thing. I really do think that like getting stronger in the lower rep ranges is probably the best bang for your buck. That's what I generally personally do and have gravitated towards as I've learned more, obviously from spending time with you and the more I, read and learn. Um, the one time I will say that I think the higher reps has utility is fat loss. Because what we are trying to do, or fat loss, or if you have someone with some metabolic resistance sort of thing, like a met comp where we have high triglycerides, right? What do we want to do? Lots of high reps. We're not talking about hypertrophy there. We're talking about doing work to get the triglycerides out of the blood, right? So that we can get into a more metabolically efficient physiology or environment is a better use of that term, so that we can get fat down a little bit, sort of thing. So like those are cases, but that's outside of hypertrophy. Hypertrophy isn't the direct goal here. It's fat loss or improving health,
And
sort of thing.
glucose management, yeah, like higher
Exactly.
reps would help with
Yep.
disposal of glucose.
Exactly. Because we're doing more work, right? And at that point, going through the motions, under a load enough to support, having to produce effort. But with that, if we're doing 30 reps and we're, gassed on rep 30, or we're doing like 6 reps, we're trying really hard, but we're obviously going to piss through a lot more glycogen and glucose on that 30 rep
Mhm.
range. So that is probably the time there where I will use that with clients, especially when we have some kind of resistance to things. But yeah, in terms of talking about hypertrophy sort of thing, the time commitment in and of itself is huge, huge.
Mhm. Yeah, I kind of feel like even in the state of dieting or fat loss, I would still veer, and I do still veer towards the lower rep ranges because I just am a believer in doing what helped you build the muscle to retain the muscle. And I'd be scared that, changing what has gotten me there as I'm losing fat and I'm now like lifting lighter loads in higher rep ranges. And like, I would be fearful that that would kind of have a negative effect on my process. And I would like to kind of be able to compare apples to apples and like, hey, I was this strong at this point when I was in a surplus, and now that I'm in a deficit, I want to know like, hey, am I actually losing strength here or not?
100%. And I would agree with that. You and I don't have met comp or anything like that. And that's not like a step one. That would be like, okay, things aren't working. I'm going down the checklist and I'm like, okay, we now need to, get glucose down, get triglycerides
Yeah.
down. But yeah, that was a
Yep.
good distinction.
Yeah. So, one like super practical thing that I want to say that I think is a huge feather in the cap of the lower rep ranges is specifically the ability to be accurate with your reps from failure. And this is something that like I even struggle with at higher rep ranges. So I know that people with less experience than me 100% would struggle with this. And so what I love about the 6 to 8 rep range is that as soon as that first rep slows, it's almost ubiquitously at around 4 reps, 5 reps, something like that. And then I can get 2 to 3 more reps after that. And it's very, very obvious when you're 1 rep from failure or 2 reps from failure. Like I can almost get that with 100% accuracy every set, regardless of the movement, it seems. And in higher rep ranges, you just can't do that. I mean, you get to 15 and it burns so bad that who knows if you want to stop at 18 because it's burning really bad, or if you literally like can't have any more force production. Because if it's just like, hey, like the leg extension is the perfect example. I cannot, even at this stage of my training, I cannot go to failure on leg extensions on a 15 plus rep set. I just can't do it. I stop because it burns so bad. And I know that it's not actually failure. I just like psychologically fail. But when I leg extension in the 7 to 11 rep range, 7 to 10, that's kind of my preferred for that movement. I know exactly where failure is. It's the rep slows and then I have 2 or 3 more. And that's produces a lot of confidence for me in the output that I'm putting in and in the progressions that I make, and knowing that I wasn't sandbagging the week before and that's why I have another rep. It just seems like part of the argument for higher reps is it's a lot easier to add a rep. Okay, great. But is it easier to add a rep because that's a smaller percentage of your total? Or is it just that you were being a pansy and now because you want to progress, you can find a little more psychological arousal to get an additional rep? And then the next week you're like, okay, a little more psychological arousal and I got an additional rep. I just really like the confidence in the lower rep ranges, knowing that progress is progress. What do you think of that?
I literally could not agree more. There's inherently going to be some margin of error with our RIR, RPE sort of thing. As your reps get larger, that margin of error like grows, that gap grows. And like you were saying, like if you're doing a set of 8, it's pretty clear whether you could do another rep or not because you're trying really hard and the weight's not fucking moving. At 19, 20, 24, their legs are going to be on fire. Psychologically, your mind's going to be telling you to stop at like set or rep 16. Now you're at rep 24. Realistically, from a pure physiologic standpoint, you can probably push to like rep 34. But it's really when is your mind gonna quit and say that burn is enough? And that's hard. And I'm not saying that I would do a good job either. Like for those that know me, like when things get uncomfortable, I'm the first one to be like, fuck this, I'm done. It's 16 reps, I'm done. I
Yeah.
can't do anymore. When I can
Yeah.
probably do 30. And it's by not putting myself in that environment, I'm able to train more accurately by just avoiding, those hard mental situations sort of thing.
Yep, totally. I have 2 more points, so let's try and finish this up in 5 minutes or so. We're running a little bit behind, but one thing I want to talk about is rep speed and tempo. And so, like you guys, if you watch me train, you know that I like to train in a very diligent, purposeful manner, and all my reps try to get the most out of every single rep that I do. Um, so as an example, I can do a set of 8 reps and I look at my video afterwards, edited from beginning to end, and it's a 60-second video for like 8 reps or something like that. And if I were to do a set of 15 or 20, I wouldn't put the same focus into each rep that I do. It would just I would go into the set being like, well, I have 15 to 20 of these. I may as well just keep this like 2-0 XO tempo. And then suddenly that like set of 15 turns into like 40 seconds, which is actually even shorter than my set of 8 was when I was really doing these like diligent, purposeful reps. And so I just feel like in that case, I want to milk the most out of every rep I do. I don't want to just go through the motions doing reps to say I did a set of 15 to 20. Like time under tension is ultimately the thing that probably controls most of the response that we get. And so if you're doing a 45-second set that's 15 reps versus a 45-second set that's 6 reps or something like that, your muscle's under tension for the same amount of time, but in the 6 rep set, you can probably pause at the lengthened position. You can control the eccentric a little bit more. So you can get more out of the parts of the rep that we know are the most effective portions of that rep.
And if we broke up a little bit, so just to make sure you were comparing like a 8 rep set to like a 16 rep set, both taking 40 seconds, correct?
Yeah. Something along those
Okay.
lines. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. The only thing I wanted to add there is like, because you said time under tension is probably like an important factor there. The benefit of the 8 rep set is the load is so much significantly higher with the 8 reps as opposed to the 16 reps with that same amount of, time
Mm.
under tension.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point too. Cool. And then the last thing I have, and this is going to be something I guess not for low reps, but joint stress is something to consider as well. And so this kind of gets into then the conversation of exercise selection and whether that matters for rep ranges. And so, like I don't like when someone says you can't do lateral raises in the 6 to 8 rep range because you have to talk about what type of lateral raise. Like, no, I'm not going to do a dumbbell lateral raise for 6 to 8 reps because it's a short overload movement and you just, there's a higher joint stress. It's a free weight movement. It's extremely overloaded at one part of the movement. But if you take something like a cable lateral raise at wrist height, and you do that for 6 to 8 reps, there's literally no reason you can't do that. That has a similar resistance curve as like your typical length and overload compound movement. So there's really no reason you can't get a ton out of a set of 6 to 8 cable lateral raises, but maybe you wouldn't do 6 to 8 dumbbell lateral raises. So it is movement dependent, but it's also equipment dependent and joint angle dependent and moment arm dependent and all of these factors as well. And so um, like, yes, if you're going to do a dumbbell lateral raise, Paul Carter would argue you can do that in the 5 to 8 rep range. I would say that personally, I would probably prefer to go to like the 10 to 15 rep range for that one. But like my overhead tricep extension with a cable, I do that for sets of 6 to 8, and I'm happy just like I am with the dual cable lateral raise. So I do think it's important to think about those distinctions of the equipment you're using and the strength slash resistance curve of that movement and how that might play into the rep range as well.
The last thing I will add on there that will be a large impacting factor there is your load increments. That is another big
Mhm.
thing. Why going to a 12 to 15 may make sense because if you can only go from 10 pounds to 15 pounds, that's a 50% load increase and your reps are going to drop off considerably.
Yeah. Yeah. In that case, I'm a huge fan of like if you have 2 or 3 work sets, I'm a huge fan of like say, okay, so you're at 10 pounds and you get 15, 14, 13 or something like that. Just jump your first set up to 15 pounds. So now you can go like, okay, instead of 15 reps with 10 pounds, I'm going to get 6 to 8 reps with 15 pounds. But then instead of trying to beat that 15-pound weight for all the sets, I'll drop it back down to 10 pounds for like the second or third set and still be able to continue the progressions there while slowly beginning to become comfortable with the heavier weight in the lower rep range.
Really good point.
Cool. I think that's pretty much all I've got on the topic.
I would agree with
Yeah,
that.
you
Yeah,
good?
I think we covered it well.
Cool. Sweet. Well, that's good. We ran a little long, but I think it's solid.
Cool. So, guys, as always, thank you for listening to Eat, Train, Prosper. Brian and I will talk to you next week.